During World War II, over 10,000 Allied Air Force servicemen were detained at a prisoner of war camp 100 miles southeast of Berlin at a place called Stalag 3. The German Air Force who controlled the camp maintained a degree of professional respect for them. But if any prisoner dared to stray over the knee-high warning wire, the guards wouldn't hesitate to shoot. However, that didn't stop prisoners from planning their escape. Some established relationships with the guards by bribing them with chocolate, coffee, or cigarettes in exchange for vital information like local maps, travel documentation, and railway schedules. But Stalag 3 was no ordinary prison camp. It was built on 60 acres of sandy soil and was surrounded by a 5-mile perimeter fence. The prisoners lived in raised barracks, and the Germans planted listening devices across the yard to monitor digging activity. And even if they were to dig a tunnel, the distance was so far it could take months. The prisoners needed a plan that would bring them closer to the fence. It's the summer of 1943. 3 prisoners, Oliver Philpot, Michael Codner, and Eric Williams, understood this challenge and approached their ranking officer, Roger Bushell, known simply as X, with an idea. X had been held in various POW camps since the beginning of the war and was the notorious mastermind behind several escape plans himself. X listened to their ingenious plan, inspired by the legend of the Trojan horse. They proposed to construct a vaulting horse in order to cover the opening of a tunnel entrance close to the fence. As a diversion, the other inmates would then vault over the horse to mask the vibration of the tunneling. The wooden horse would be constructed from salvaged plywood from Red Cross parcels, and each morning they planned to move it out into the compound with a man hidden inside. X loved the plan and gave the trio the go-ahead. He began recruiting skilled prisoners to assist them with all facets of the escape, but there was much to do to ensure its success. Teams of men were busy forging identification documents which were required to travel through war zones. Tailors were preparing clothing for the escapees so they would blend in with local residents once they reached the outside. And the prisoners developed an elaborate signaling system to alert the crew when the guards were approaching. The horse was finally ready, but before the digging could commence, they had to fool the guards. They introduced their new routine by intentionally tipping over the wooden horse several times, blaming it on a clumsy vaulter. This caught the attention of the Germans, who meticulously examined the horse. But after several days of inspection, the Germans had found nothing suspicious and soon ignored them. They had taken the bait, and so digging began. Each day, the team would carry the wooden horse out to the same spot with one man hidden inside. The men dug with crude spades, formed from wooden bowls and old cans, whatever they could find, and their only source of light came from a single dimly lit candle. They reinforced the walls with their bed planks and placed the dirt from the tunnel into canvas bags, hanging them inside the horse. At the end of the day, the digger would carefully replace the topsoil to mask their effort so the ground appeared unbroken. Then, the vaulters would cease their exercise and carry the wooden horse back into the hut. Day after day, the men toiled both above and below the surface, with conditions worsening by the hour. Inside the dark and constricting tunnel, the men struggled to breathe, and the continual overexertion from vaulting, mixed with the heat and humidity, was taking its toll. But after 8 long weeks of digging, they had only tunneled 40 feet and were physically and emotionally exhausted. Time was running out, and the plan was now in jeopardy. One day, Codner was down in the tunnel when all of a sudden, disaster struck. The ceiling began to give way. Codner panicked, but before he had time to signal to the others, the roof collapsed. The cave-in was so severe that the surface of the ground was broken, opening a hole and exposing the tunnel. Luckily, one of the vaulters spotted the hole before the guards did. He dove on top of it, pretending he twisted his ankle, giving Codner just enough time to shore up the tunnel below. Because of their quick response, the plan was still intact, and in order to speed up the process, X agreed they'd now send 2 men down into the tunnel. Finally, on October 29, 1943, 114 days after they had begun digging, the tunnel was complete. But now it was a race against time. The train schedules and the moonlight needed to guide them would be changing soon. They had to make a break for it, and fast. That very morning, Codner was left inside the tunnel to burrow the last few vital feet. But they had to account for his absence during the midday head count. So the other prisoners shuffled around, confusing the guards who didn't notice that Codner was missing. It's now 5 p.m. This time, 3 men would be carried out on the horse. Williams and Philpot would be heading towards their freedom, while the other prisoner would be left behind to close up the hatch and eliminate any evidence of the tunnel's existence. The 3 escapees anxiously awaited until dusk before they could exit the tunnel. But as they were about to escape, suddenly a sentry was pacing right above their heads. This was it. All of those months of planning and effort wasted as their elaborate plot was about to be exposed. And just as all hope was about to be lost, a commotion was heard back at the camp. The guard left to investigate. Luckily, it was part of a pre-planned diversion created by X. As soon as the guard was out of sight, they darted out of the tunnel and into the safety of the woods. They had done the impossible. They had escaped from the inescapable camp. The 3 men now had to begin their long journey home by making their way out of Germany to the Baltic Sea by rail, where they hoped to reach neutral territory. But they had to split up in order to increase their chances of survival. Philpot had decided to set off on his own route. So there, under the darkness of the night, they shook each other's hands and said what could be their final goodbyes. And with that, they went on their separate ways. Williams and Codner made their way to Denmark, where they managed to sneak aboard a small fishing boat that was about to set sail for Sweden. But before it was allowed to leave port, the ship had to be inspected by German soldiers and their dogs. The ship's captain, who was sympathetic to the stowaways, distracted the guards with schnapps. Meanwhile, Philpot bought a train ticket to Poland and climbed on board. He was soon challenged by a policeman who fooled him with a false identity card. He arrived in Poland the next morning and hid in a coal bin on a ship bound for Sweden. All 3 men now had freedom within their grasp. But back at Stalag 3, the escape had quickly been discovered, and the prisoners who helped the men were put under lockdown. X was thrown into solitary confinement, but all their sacrifices would serve a purpose. Codner and Williams arrived safely in Sweden, where they immediately went to the British consulate. There, to their astonishment, was Oliver Philpot, who had arrived a few days earlier. It was an emotional reunion as they recounted their miraculous escape. Despite the incredible odds, Michael Codner, Eric Williams, and Oliver Philpot had made it all the way back home to England, where their arrival was widely celebrated. It's said that when X was released from solitary confinement, he grinned after being informed that their escape was successful. At war's end, the account of their escape was published in the book The Wooden Horse, but their incredible story of survival would provide hope to prisoners of war and those who awaited their return.